In February 1959, rescuers climbing a remote slope in the Ural Mountains found a tent half buried in snow. 9 experienced hikers had fled into a blizzard in the middle of the night, in temperatures around minus 30 degrees. Several of them weren't wearing any shoes. None of them made it back, and to this day, no one has ever fully explained why they ran. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. In January of 1959, a 20-year-old engineering student named Igor Dyatlov organized a skiing expedition throughout the northern Ural Mountains. He was experienced, well-liked, and careful. The kind of leader other students trusted with a different route. He assembled a group of 9 others, most of them fellow students at the Ural Pass Institute. 7 men, 2 women, all in their early 20s, plus 1 older member in their late 30s. Their goal was Mount Autorton, a peak whose name frighteningly is often translated as "don't go there." But on January 23rd, 10 hikers set out. By all accounts, spirits were high. Photos from the trip show them laughing, joking, playing music on the train route. 5 days in, a member of the hike developed severe joint pain and knew he couldn't continue. He said goodbye to the group and turned back toward the nearest village. He had no way of knowing it, but that decision would save his life. He would spend the rest of his own life as the only person who could say what his friends were like. The remaining 9 pressed on. On February 1st, they were making their way toward the pass where a snowstorm hit, cutting visibility down to almost nothing. Somewhere in that whiteout, they lost the trail and drifted off course, ending up on the slope of a mountain called Kolak. In the language of the local Mansi people, the name means dead mountain. Rather than lose the elevation they already climbed up by turning back, Dyatlov made the call to set up camp right there, on the open slope, instead of retreating to the tree line a mile below. It was, by every account afterward, a strange decision for someone that careful. Investigators would spend decades asking why. That night, in a small joke for a camp newsletter they were putting together, the group wrote something about snowmen being real. It was meant to be funny. It's one of the last things any of them ever wrote. Sometime after that, in the middle of the night, something happened inside that tent. Whatever it was, it caused 9 people to grab knives, cut their way out, and run away. They left almost everything behind. Coats, boots, supplies, and temperatures cold enough to cause frostbite in minutes. When the group missed their planned check-in day on February 20th, their sports club grew concerned. A search was organized, made up of fellow students, volunteers, and eventually, the military. Searchers found the tent, cut open from the inside, half collapsed under snow. Footprints led away from the campsite, down toward the tree line over half a mile away. They stayed in single file, evenly spaced, showing no signs of anyone running from an attacker or fighting anyone off. Following those footsteps, searchers reached the edge of the forest. Nearby were the bodies of 2 of the hikers. They were in almost nothing. Thin layers, no coats, no shoes. Completely naked. The cedar tree above them had broken branches as high as 16 feet up, as though someone had climbed it, maybe trying to see something in the dark, or trying to get away from something on the ground. A short distance away, 3 more bodies were spotted, scattered between the tree and the tent. Their positions suggested they'd been trying to make it back to the tent when they died. 5 members of the group were now accounted for. 4 were still missing. It would take almost 3 more months in the spring melt to find them. In May, searchers found the remaining 4 in a ravine, buried under snow, some distance from the cedar tree, and this is where the case stopped making any sense. 2 of the 4 had major chest fractures, severe enough that investigators compared the force involved to being hit by a car. 1 had a fatal skull injury. None of them had matching external wounds. Whatever had caused that kind of internal damage hadn't left a mark on the outside of their bodies. 1 of the hikers was missing her tongue. Investigators at the time couldn't explain that detail. It's still debated today. Some believe scavengers or the effects of lying in running water for months are the most likely explanation. Others have never accepted that answer. Adding another layer to the mystery, testing on some of the clothing from the ravine came back radioactive, far above background levels. It later came out that one of the members of the group had lived in a region affected by a nuclear accident 2 years earlier, and had helped with the cleanup. Whether that fully explains the readings is still argued. In May of 1959, Soviet investigators closed the case. Their official findings was that the hikers had died as a result of what they called a compelling natural force, a phrase that explained nothing and raised everything. The files were sealed. The investigation ended less than a month after the last bodies were found, and for over 3 decades, almost no one outside the Soviet government was allowed to see the full case file. When the files were finally opened to the public in the 1990s, researchers noticed pages were missing. With no real answer on record, theories filled the silence, and they have never really stopped. The most obvious explanation is also the hardest to prove: an avalanche. For decades, this theory struggled. This was because the slope where they camped wasn't steep enough for a typical avalanche, and there was no debris when investigators arrived weeks later. But in 2021, a team of Swiss scientists modeled something more specific: a small slab avalanche. Not the dramatic wall of snow you picture in movies, but a smaller, localized slide. One capable of moving a slab of packed snow just far enough to strike the tent and cause blunt injuries like the ones the hikers had. It's currently the leading scientific explanation, and Russian investigators formally endorsed a version of it in 2020. It accounts for the panic, the knife cuts through the tents, and some other injuries. What it explains less clearly is why experienced hikers in that situation would run over a mile through the trees in the dark instead of digging out and staying close to their supplies. Other theories have tried to fill that gap. One is infrasound, the idea that certain wind conditions around the peak could have generated low-frequency sound waves. Another points to reports from a separate hiking group, roughly 30 miles away, who described strange glowing orbs in the night sky that same week. Some connected this to a secret Soviet weapons testing in that area. Unfortunately, that theory has never been backed up by any declassified military record, and most researchers today consider it unlikely. But it persisted for decades, partly because the Soviet government's own secrecy made every alternative feel just as plausible as the official story. Then, there are the stories with essentially no evidence behind them at all. Paranormal encounters, cryptid sightings, and worse, kept alive mostly by how strange the case already is, with or without them. Even now, with the avalanche theory as the closest thing to a scientific conclusion, it doesn't answer every question. It doesn't fully explain the missing tone. It doesn't fully explain the radiation. It explains the slope, not a feeling. What it can't tell you is what it was like inside that tent in the seconds before 9 people decided that being outside, in a blizzard, in the dark, in their socks, was safer than staying anywhere where they were. Yuri, the one member who turned back early, spent the rest of his life trying to make sense of what happened to his friends. He attended nearly every memorial, he answered questions from researchers for decades. He never got an answer that satisfied him either. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2013, the last living link to the expedition. Every few years, someone claims to have finally solved it, and every few years, the same handful of details refuse to fit neatly into anyone's explanation. Maybe it really was just snow, wind, and 9 people making a terrified decision in the dark that cost them everything. Or maybe the compelling natural force the Soviet Union wrote down in 1959 was just the easiest way to close the file on something they didn't have the words for either. Either way, on that mountain slope, in the middle of the night, something made 9 experienced, capable people choose a blizzard over their own tent. And 65 years later, we still don't know fully what happened. If this one stuck with you, subscribe. There's a new deep dive into a real unsolved mystery every week, and this isn't the strangest one yet. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys for the support, and I'll see you guys in the next one.